At 1:43 a.m. on July 30th, 2025, the skies above Ukraine trembled not with thunder, but with war. From multiple directions, 320 Russian drones and 8 cruise missiles surged into Ukrainian airspace in a calculated, surprise assault within minutes. The city of Kherson lay in ruins. 32 civilians were killed on impact, 14 others were critically wounded. A school, a church, a hospital and the fragile hope of recovery were all torn apart in the night. But Ukraine's response would come faster and more unexpectedly than anyone could have imagined. 72 hours later, Ukraine struck back, not with billion-dollar missiles, not with NATO air power, but with 270 homemade UAVs, cobbled together from scrap parts, GPS trackers, commercial drone motors, and recycled explosives. What followed wasn't just retaliation, it was humiliation. How did these low-cost drones strike a major Russian base undetected? Could a few $1,000 drone really cripple a multi-million-dollar military installation? Let's find out. What happened? July 30th, 2025, the night sky over Ukraine lit up in a blaze of terror. This wasn't a celebration, it wasn't fireworks. It was war cold, calculated, and merciless. From multiple vectors, Russian forces launched a barrage of 320 UAVs, including Lancets, Shaheds, and loitering munitions, accompanied by 8 cruise missiles. Ukrainian radar scrambled. Air defense systems roared to life. In just over 12 minutes, 61 drones were intercepted, an impressive defense, but far from complete. 16 drones and 6 cruise missiles broke through their targets, 8 civilian sites scattered across the country. The worst hit, Kherson, a city once on the front lines, now in fragile recovery. Explosions tore through a school, a church, an apartment block, and a field hospital. A direct hit on a medical tent trapped children and medics in a raging inferno. The death toll mounted rapidly, 32 civilians dead, 14 severely wounded, many suffering burns and shrapnel injuries. None of them were combatants, none wore uniforms. They were just ordinary people, caught in a deliberate strike designed not for strategic gain but to crush morale. Survivors described the horror as a storm of screaming metal. Rescuers clawed through rubble with bare hands, lighting their way with phone screens. The once peaceful sky echoed with sirens, fire, and screams. When President Volodymyr Zelensky received the full casualty report, he reportedly stared at the floor in silence for nearly a minute. Then he said just one word: enough. This wasn't merely an attack, it was a message etched in steel, smoke, and civilian blood. A message aimed not at military outposts, but at the soul of the nation. To the watching world, it was a chilling reminder. Russia had not only struck Ukraine's defenses, it had targeted its people. And as smoke continued to rise from the ruins of Kherson, one question gripped Kyiv: how do you avenge 30 innocent lives? Because when civilians are the first to fall, don't expect a response bound by rules. We will support Ukraine both materially and morally. General Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. By dawn, the fires in Kherson still hadn't died down. The final toll was grim beyond words: 30 dead, 14 maimed, dozens more now homeless, their lives shattered, their futures uncertain. In Kyiv, the weight of loss settled like a shadow over the capital. At 5:10 a.m., President Zelensky convened an emergency meeting deep beneath his presidential office in a secure military bunker. There were no speeches, only data, satellite feeds, and grief. After reviewing the full intelligence report, Zelensky stood and said, "They think we are weak. Let us show them what desperation can do." There would be no ballistic missiles, no stealth jets, no NATO battalions. Ukraine's response would be forged from its own hands, from its own defiance, from its will to endure. The plan: bold, unconventional, desperate, brilliant. 270 homemade UAVs assembled from commercial drone motors, dash cams, cheap GPS modules, recycled artillery shells, and explosive fragments. These weren't advanced drones. They weren't stealthy, armed with AI, or satellite linked, but they didn't Need to be, their power wasn't in tech, it was in volume, in silence, and in surprise. Their destination, the Sochi oil depot, a critical Russian fuel hub supplying armored units across the southern front. Ukraine had made its choice: strike not just back but deep. Strike not just hard but where it hurts, where it burns. This was no longer just a war over territory. It had become personal. And now, vengeance had taken flight. Before we witness the full force of Ukraine's wrath, please support us by liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Do you stand with Russia or with Ukraine? At precisely 3:10 a.m. on August 2nd, 2025, while most of Sochi slept beneath the cold flicker of security floodlights, a threat emerged one Russia never saw coming. 270 Ukrainian UAVs crossed into Russian airspace at low altitude, flying under radar coverage and slipping through the cracks in Russia's electronic defenses. These drones weren't NATO-grade, nor were they Western-made. They were entirely homemade, assembled in garages and workshops using dash cameras, off-the-shelf drone motors, modified GPS trackers, and scavenged explosives, many of them pulled from unexploded Russian shells, wrapped in aluminum foil to reduce their thermal signatures, guided by open-source flight software, and powered by battery packs salvaged from commercial e-bikes. Each drone cost less than $600, but together, they carried the destructive potential of a modern airstrike, millions of dollars worth of havoc unleashed in silence. Their target, the Sochi Strategic Oil Depot, a sprawling military refueling hub just beyond the Olympic Park, containing more than 1.4 million barrels of refined diesel and tank-grade fuel. A direct strike here wouldn't just cause chaos, it could ignite an uncontrollable chain reaction, and it did. At 3:12 a.m., the first UAV hit fuel tank 1 for SIA 280,000 barrel containment silo. The explosion lit up the coast like sunrise. Within seconds, nearby fuel lines erupted in secondary blasts, throwing fireballs to 100 feet into the sky. Shockwaves from the detonation shattered windows in a 2-mile radius. Surveillance cameras captured Russian soldiers scrambling in chaos, some barefoot, others trying to drag burning comrades from beneath collapsing debris. But the assault was far from over. For 7 relentless minutes, wave after wave of drones continued arriving, striking fuel trucks, pumping stations, and a tank servicing yard where 12 T-90 tanks sat exposed during refueling. Multiple vehicles erupted in flames. Some exploded on the spot, launching turrets and jagged steel debris like shrapnel from a colossal grenade. By 3:19 a.m., all radio communications from the depot went dark. Emergency flares pierced the night sky, but no reinforcements came. When Russian fire crews finally reached the scene at 3:43 a.m., it was too late. The inferno was uncontrollable. Smoke billowed 500 feet into the air, so thick it was visible to satellites orbiting above the Black Sea. The damage was catastrophic. Over 60% of the facility was obliterated, tens of millions of dollars in fuel gone. Dozens of military personnel were either killed or suffered life-altering burns. Southern Russia's tactical refueling capabilities were paralyzed for days. But beyond the fire and destruction, the message was unmistakable: Ukraine had struck. Deep, loud, without warning. This was more than retaliation, it was humiliation. For the Russian command in Sochi, confident in their distance from the front lines, August 2nd would forever be remembered as the night a homemade storm reduced steel, fuel, and pride to ashes. By morning, the world had changed. Satellite reconnaissance from U.S. military assets confirmed the devastation. For major fuel tanks reduced to molten wreckage, the charred husks of T-90 tanks scattered across a scorched crater. And what was once a key military depot now smoldering beneath a plume of black smoke that reached 6,000 feet into the sky. Russian state media went silent. No images were aired, no names released, no statements from the Kremlin, but the silence spoke louder than any broadcast. International intelligence agencies, however, did not stay quiet. Within hours, High-resolution satellite images leaked by European defense analysts revealed the full scope of destruction. News outlets around the world seized on the visuals. Sochi burns, declared Germany's Der Spiegel. Ukraine hits Russia where it hurts, reported the Times of London. Global markets responded immediately. Crude oil prices spiked by 7.9%, the sharpest single-day surge since the 2022 refinery bombings in the Middle East. Brent crude soared past $110 a barrel. European fuel futures jumped 12% overnight, prompting emergency warnings from energy regulators. In Brussels, NATO convened an emergency intelligence session. No public statements were made. While the strike was quietly applauded in several Allied capitals, it remained a gray zone operation legal under wartime necessity, yet diplomatically explosive. From Kyiv, the message was clear. And this time, there was no apology. We do not target civilians, declared a stern-faced official from Ukraine's Security Council. But if Russia insists on burning our homes and hospitals, we will burn their fuel. Military analysts would later call the operation a textbook case of asymmetric warfare. A mere $150,000 in total costs 270 low-cost drones, each worth around $600, had inflicted over $320 million in direct damage. More than that, the strike had paralyzed Russian logistics across the southern command for weeks. Inside Russia, the fallout was immediate and chaotic. The regional defense commander, responsible for Sochi, was abruptly replaced. Orders were issued across southern military districts to relocate ammunition and fuel depots to more secure underground facilities. The reorganization would take 7 to 10 days' time. Russia could not afford significantly slowing frontline resupply operations, but beyond fuel depots and command reshuffles, something even more vital had been pierced: Russia's sense of territorial invincibility. Sochi, long considered untouchable, a resort city safely cradled between the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains, had become a monument to false security. That illusion crumbled in just 7 minutes, brought down not by fighter jets or ballistic missiles, but by garage-built drones. Ukraine had not merely retaliated, it had rewritten the rules of engagement. The battlefield was no longer defined by stealth bombers and guided missiles alone. It now included PVC piping, smartphone GPS chips, and the will to strike the unstrikable. What happened next would depend on how Moscow absorbed the shock. But one thing was already certain: the fire in Kherson had lit a fuse. The fire in Sochi had reached the powder. As the smoke cleared over Sochi, a new kind of realization took hold, not just in Moscow, but in military think tanks and defense ministries around the world. Western analysts quickly deconstructed the drones Ukraine had used. They weren't military-grade UAVs. These were flying bombs, homemade, improvised not in defense labs, but in the basements and backyards of ordinary Ukrainians. Each unit cost less than $600, yet collectively, they had caused hundreds of millions in damage. Their construction was as clever as it was resourceful: motors scavenged from commercial racing drones, cameras repurposed from dashboard dashcams, GPS chips lifted from smartphones, the explosive payloads harvested from decommissioned artillery shells, the drone frames made from PVC tubing, wrapped in tinfoil to reduce heat signatures. This was warfare stripped of its luxury, built on necessity, sustained by determination. In military doctrine, the tactic is called asymmetric deterrence. In Kyiv, it had another name: existence warfare. When a nation has no stealth bombers, it turns to screwdrivers and salvage circuit boards. When it's fighting for its right to exist, it innovates not out of choice but out of need. The effects were swift and undeniable. Russian supply lines in the south temporarily collapsed. Fuel convoys stalled. Transport routes were rerouted hundreds of kilometers east. Artillery rounds were delayed. Diesel became scarce. The Sochi depot had been a critical logistical artery, and now it was ash inside Ukraine. Morale surged. For a population still enduring daily air raids, the message was electric. We may bleed, but we are not powerless. In a brief televised statement, President Zelensky addressed the nation. We did not start this war, he said, but we will choose how it ends and we will choose it on our terms. Russia's loss extended far beyond equipment and fuel. For the first time since the war began, Moscow was forced to face a painful realization: nowhere was safe. Every airbase, fuel depot, command center once considered out of reach had to be reclassified as vulnerable. Defending every corner of the Russian Federation would now stretch an already exhausted military even thinner. And around the globe, military observers took notice. From Washington to Tel Aviv, Warsaw to Tokyo, defense strategists began rethinking how low-cost drones, homemade tech, and local ingenuity could reshape the future of warfare. The strike on Sochi wasn't just about fuel, it wasn't just about destruction. It was about messaging, morale, and the raw power of improvised resistance. In this new era, the side with the most money didn't guarantee victory, the side with the most imagination might. In just 4 days, the world had witnessed a seismic shift in the nature of modern combat. From the moment 320 Russian drones and cruise missiles rained down on Kherson, killing 30 civilians in their sleep, to the hour 270 makeshift Ukrainian UAVs set fire to Sochi, the message was brutally clear. War is no longer waged solely with billion-dollar arsenals. It is fought with ingenuity, desperation, and precision. Ukraine's strike didn't just destroy fuel. It shattered illusions of distance, of safety, of invincibility. It forced a superpower to confront a bitter truth. Even its most protected cities are not immune. Even its heartland is vulnerable, and it reminded the world of something else. In this war, the underdog is not helpless. Ukraine's drones were not instruments of terror. They were messages assembled in silence, launched without ceremony, felt with absolute clarity. And that message echoed louder than any political speech. If you burn our hospitals, we will burn your fuel. What started as a desperate act of survival has now become a global blueprint for resistance. Asymmetric resilience. Ukraine has transformed off-the-shelf consumer technology into battlefield superiority, inspiring militaries and resistance movements far beyond its borders. The battlefield has evolved, so has the doctrine. And perhaps so has the war itself. The skies may fall silent for now, but beneath that uneasy calm, the next generation of warfare is already humming, quietly reshaping the future of conflict. If this story gave you a new perspective on modern war and the courage of a nation under siege, please consider supporting our work. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who care about truth, strategy, and global justice. Your support helps us continue telling the stories that matter. On July 14, 2025, the United States and Ukraine launched a joint strike against a Russian military train transporting fuel and weapons. From the deck of a U.S. aircraft carrier, 9 F-A-18 fighter jets roared into the sky under full afterburner. At the same time, 60 Ukrainian drones, hand-built, satellite-guided, and lethal, entered Russian airspace from the west. Their first target, a high-speed Russian weapons train carrying over 1.2 million pounds of fuel and ammunition, enough to supply 3 missile bases being constructed near Russia's Arctic frontier. In less than 8 minutes, the entire supply line was consumed by fire, but the real blow came next. 3 newly constructed Russian ICBM facilities valued at more than $4.5 billion were obliterated in coordinated precision strikes. No survivors, no radar response, just craters, silence, and ash. Why did the United States and Ukraine strike together? Why now? And what message does this operation send to the world? Let's break it down. In early July 2025, U.S. intelligence satellites began tracking an alarming development in the Russian Far East. Over just 18 days, 3 massive military installations had materialized, rushed into existence, but heavily fortified. What set them apart wasn't just their scale, but their purpose. Each site was engineered to house mobile launchers capable of firing intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs with ranges exceeding 6,500 miles, enough to reach Chicago in 27 minutes or Washington, D.C. in 32. The Discovery sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. These weren't symbolic threats. They were first strike platforms constructed with chilling speed and precision. Even more troubling, Ukraine's defense ministry confirmed that Russian supply trains, some stretching over 1 miles long, were delivering fuel, high-grade warhead components, and advanced electronic warfare systems non-stop for more than 2 weeks. Each shipment carried an estimated value of $750 million, making this rail line the most expensive weapons supply corridor since the Cold War. To both Washington and Kyiv, the message was unmistakable: Russia wasn't preparing for defense, it was positioning for a preemptive nuclear capability that could bypass traditional warning systems. During a closed-door briefing, a U.S. general put it bluntly: "If we wait, we won't be fighting in Eastern Europe. We'll be defending Seattle." For the first time in over 2 decades, mainland America was within realistic reach of a Russian ICBM strike corridor, and all of it had been hidden, masked by rail smoke, satellite blind spots, and the global distraction of ongoing war elsewhere. The threat was real and time was running out. What happened next shocked the world. Within 48 hours of confirming the intelligence, the White House Situation Room became a hive of urgent activity. Top brass from U.S. Cyber Command, Strategic Command, and NATO's Forward Command post-convened via encrypted channels. The assessment was grim. The 3 Russian missile bases were just 96 hours away from operational readiness. Each site was equipped to deploy RS-28 Sarmat missiles, also known as Satan, capable of carrying 10 nuclear warheads each. The combined payloads of these warheads could vaporize multiple American cities in a single coordinated strike. The intelligence reports were damning. One satellite image showed 8 fuel tankers disguised as civilian cargo parked outside a hardened missile silo. Another captured Russian engineers installing blast-resistant domes designed to repel bunker-busting ordnance. These weren't early warning outposts or defensive installations. These were launch platforms intended for offense, not deterrence. At 2,100 hours aboard the USS Ronald Reagan in the Bering Sea, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command finalized the response, Operation Iron Torch. The plan was bold, high-risk, unprecedented. 9 FA-18 Super Hornets would lead a high-speed precision strike on the Russian weapons convoy. 6 EA-18G Growlers would jam all radar and communications within a 70-mile radius, rendering Russian air defense blind and mute. 6 F-15 Eagles would establish air superiority and neutralize any interception threats. And in a classified twist, 60 Ukrainian custom-built drones equipped with thermal cloaking and satellite uplinks would act as scouts, jammers, and decoys, absorbing enemy fire and disrupting response systems. This was a coalition of high-tech air power and battlefield improvisation. Over $2.1 billion worth of cutting-edge firepower launched from a floating fortress of steel, all converging on a single billion-dollar weapons train that wasn't supposed to exist. Before we dive into the heart of this strike and its implications for global security, drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Also, let us know which country you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an update on breaking military developments. The countdown was on at exactly 2:37 a.m. Moscow time on July 14, 2025. The night sky over eastern Russia exploded not with thunder, but with the roar of jet engines and the electric pulse of warfare. The first wave to arrive, 60 Ukrainian drones launched covertly from 4 deployed positions in western Ukraine and eastern Poland. Small, improvised in appearance, but lethally engineered. Each drone cost under $10,000, yet managed to infiltrate a multi-billion-dollar Russian air defense network, beginning to jam radar frequencies in a 50-kilometer arc. The sky shimmered. With static, Russia's surveillance grid went blind. Then came the Americans, 6 AA-18G Growlers, skimming just 300 feet above the treetops, lit up the electronic spectrum. Their ALQ-218 receivers swiftly located and disabled Russia's early warning systems in just 72 seconds. Russian command scrambled to activate backup radars only to find themselves watching decoy feeds generated by the drones. Then came the Kill Team 9F A-18 Super Hornets, armed with AGM-15 for joint standoff weapons and GBU-53 B Stormbreaker bombs, locked onto a high-value moving target, a Russian military train convoy. Traveling at 70 miles per hour through a remote forest rail corridor, the 14-car train carried more than 450,000 gallons of refined propellant, warhead components, and mobile radar systems, a package valued at over $3 billion. The first strike hit car number 7, loaded with volatile oxidizers. The result was catastrophic, a chain reaction detonation that ran the entire length of the convoy. A fireball 300 feet high erupted, and the shockwave shattered windows in towns 15 miles away. On thermal satellite imagery, analysts watched as the inferno spread through the forest. In just 11 minutes, an area of 2.7 square kilometers was reduced to ash. At the epicenter, temperatures soared beyond to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to vaporize steel. Simultaneously, high above, 6 F-15 Eagles maintained air dominance, taking down to scrambling Russian interceptors and neutralizing a mobile SAM unit attempting to go active just east of the strike zone. From the first jamming signal to the last bomb drop, the mission lasted just 7 minutes and 48 seconds. No American or Ukrainian aircraft were lost. Pentagon sources later confirmed the entire Russian weapons and fuel train was obliterated. There was no salvage, no survivors. The strike was a textbook display of modern asymmetric warfare precision, speed, and overwhelming coordination. For Russia, this was not just a tactical defeat, it was a strategic humiliation. For America and Ukraine, it was a message: we still own the sky. And if you thought the train strike was devastating, just wait. The missile-based attacks were even worse. The destruction of Russia's billion-dollar convoy sent shockwaves through the Kremlin. But Operation Iron Torch wasn't over. Phase 2 was already underway. A crippling follow-up strike was now targeting 3 Russian ICBM launch sites still under construction, but just days away from operational readiness. At 3:12 a.m., radar stations near Khabarovsk Krai detected faint, ambiguous movement too subtle to trigger alarms. It was the second wave. 5 more Super Hornets, armed with bunker-busting JDA-MIS for F-15E Strike Eagles, and a new swarm of Ukrainian drones tasked with target illumination and real-time battle damage assessment. The first target, Site SoCal 17, the Central Command node. Intelligence revealed it housed a reinforced concrete dome protecting key communications and nuclear targeting systems. 1 GBU-31 penetrator bomb slammed through 3 meters of steel-reinforced concrete, detonating. Within the bunker, the blast vaporized the operations center, killing an estimated 43 personnel, including 2 senior missile technicians. Seismic monitors in nearby infrastructure recorded a detonation equivalent to 1.5 tons of TNT. The second target, Site Baikal 3, is suspected storage and deployment facility for mobile missile launchers and warheads. Ukrainian UAVs fed live GPS coordinates to the incoming jets. A direct strike on the main depot ignited 14 tons of solid fuel propellant, triggering a massive explosion. The roof was blown off the underground facility. Flames surged 100 feet into the air, and tremors were felt as far away as Blagoveshchensk, 90 miles distant. Russian emergency broadcasts briefly reported the incident as a natural gas explosion. But the most devastating strike was yet to come. Target 3, Site Krylo 9, a barracks and logistics hub. Here, over 200 Russian soldiers were stationed to secure and maintain operational equipment. Believing the site was still weeks away from combat deployment, it had minimal air defenses and limited hardened shelters. At 3:41 a.m., the final phase began. At precisely 7 o'clock Moscow time, 3 precision-guided bombs tore through the compound. Satellite imagery captured the moment a 270-foot-long barracks building collapsed inward, entombing dozens inside. Fires raged for over 3 hours. Rescue helicopters circled helplessly above, unable to land due to the intense residual heat and secondary detonations still erupting below. Initial Russian media reports downplayed the event, citing minor infrastructure damage, but intercepted military communications painted a starkly different picture: mass casualties, total loss of base integrity, and immediate orders for a full withdrawal. By sunrise, all 3 bases in the strike zone had been rendered completely inoperable. What had taken Russia 17 days and nearly $4.5 billion to construct was reduced to ash in under 11 minutes of high-precision combat. American defense analysts labeled it a textbook lightning strike executed with surgical precision and flawless coordination. Ukrainian officials called it a joint masterpiece. In Moscow, it was viewed as a full-blown catastrophe. Russia's attempt to project strength had backfired catastrophically. Not only had it failed to intimidate the U.S. homeland, it had revealed the deep vulnerability of its latest nuclear infrastructure before a global audience. As the smoke cleared over Russia's devastated railways and annihilated missile bases, the world watched in stunned silence. Moscow, once confident in its expanding strategic posture, was now publicly humiliated. It had lost 3 critical military installations, a billion-dollar fuel convoy, and over 230 personnel in under 15 minutes at the hands of a coalition it had grossly underestimated. At 7 a.m. Washington time, the President of the United States addressed the nation from the Oval Office. America does not wait for threats to reach our shores. We meet them where they rise. Let this serve as a message. If you point a nuclear weapon at our homeland, you won't get a warning, you'll get a crater. Behind closed doors, NATO leaders convened in an emergency session. Intelligence gathered during the operation revealed more than Russian aggression. Covert Chinese surveillance drones had been detected just 40 kilometers from Site Krylo 9. The alliance's red lines had been crossed by more than one adversary. Ukraine, still enduring relentless bombardment, released a rare joint statement from its Minister of Defense and Commander of the Air Forces. The United States believed in us when others hesitated. With every drone we launch, we honor that. Trust and reclaim what is ours. On social media, aerial footage of the destroyed Russian site slate anonymously went viral. Within 6 hours, it had surpassed 22 million views. The scorched earth, the collapsed bunkers, the twisted wreckage of a once pristine rail line. It all told a clear story. Modern warfare doesn't wait for declarations. It strikes in silence, then vanishes into the clouds. Military experts worldwide hailed Operation Iron Torch as a masterclass in 21st century joint warfare, proof that precision, speed, and coalition synchronization can dismantle even the most fortified installations. But amid this celebration came a sobering truth: Russia's next move remained uncertain. Its long-range radar systems had been knocked offline during the initial wave. Satellite uplinks were severed for nearly 8 minutes, plunging command centers into chaos. No counterattack followed, but the threat of escalation loomed heavily over every NATO briefing. Meanwhile, concern surged across the Pacific. Japan, South Korea, and Australia issued alerts after detecting rapid construction activity near both Russian and Chinese naval facilities. The stunning success of Iron Torch raised a strategic question few were prepared to answer. If America could do this in Russia, what message did that send to Beijing and Tehran? By nightfall, the USS Ronald Reagan had already repositioned. In Kyiv, drone assembly lines glowed under full lighting. The global landscape had shifted yet again. This wasn't just about Ukraine anymore. It was about the world recognizing that distance no longer protects tyrants. The battlefield is global. And when provoked, America can erase a billion-dollar threat before the enemy even knows it's gone. For those watching from retirement homes, from VFW halls, or from family living rooms, the message rang loud and clear: America still leads. America still strikes, and America still wins. Operation Iron Torch wasn't just a military operation, it was a warning, etched in steel and flame. In just a few minutes, the United States and Ukraine dismantled a Russian weapons network, obliterated 3 intercontinental missile bases, and rendered the blueprint of modern warfare. But this mission was more than just military might. It was a reaffirmation of America's enduring resolve. In a moment when others hesitated, the US acted decisively not just to defend its homeland, but to safeguard the fragile balance of global deterrence. In a world where conflicts begin with lines of code and end in smoldering craters, speed, clarity, and alliances have become the defining traits of victory. And for millions of Americans, especially those who served, who sacrificed, who remember, the Cold War drills and nuclear standoffs, this mission struck home.